find work was the biggest issue as far as like trying to get placement into a company, because at the time there was like really nothing available. That and the skill level wasn't there yet for me. Jobs that I want, it wasn't really realistic for me to go after them because I didn't know the 3D skills, I didn't know like the formatting, like the size, like the basics that they want you to know. Aside from the art skill, I had no clue what. So like right away out of college, I tried to get a job at like Blizzard and Valve, which was completely unrealistic. And I learned pretty quick that you have to do a lot of the freelance stuff. Even if you do get a job with, say, like a smaller company doing browser-based games or like Flash games or iPad or iPod apps or whatever, iPhone. You want to get a lot of the freelance commissions to build your portfolio, aside from the stuff that you can't really include in your portfolio because it's owned by someone else.
Right.
So that's what actually ultimately got me the job I got today. Is someone was going through my personal website. This is the website I had up when I landed this job. It's for Studio Vanilla, and they're located in Thousand Oaks, California, and it's the first AAA game that I've been working on. But all he did was look at my sketchbook. This is what brought him in, is my sketchbook more than my portfolio itself. Of all the things that he could be looking at, he was commenting on my line work and not my actual painting. I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or be worried about that or what, but for all these years I had just like the social networking sites and the DeviantArt and all that stuff, and those are all well and good, but having an actual professional website that acts as your portfolio is key. Like there's no way to get around it. You can't just send an employer your DeviantArt and be like, hey, look at my gallery. It's just like there's
really
way too much other
stuff. Have the website.
You want like a dedicated, focused website that lists your portfolio, your resume, basically. Just have it out there on display, your personal experience and all that stuff.
Should that be linking into DeviantArt and LinkedIn and all that stuff?
Yeah. The social networking sites is more important, I think. DeviantArt is good on its own, just for exposure, I guess. But as a professional, a way to attract employers, it's not good. Right out of Kendall, I had my own website and everything, and I was paying for the hosting fees. Buy the domain name, that's like $10 a year, so it's not a huge deal. But paying for the actual hosting, I think was like, I don't know, like 20 bucks a month or something like that, or. But that, coming out of Kendall, not really having that much work, is a pretty hefty toll to like try to make your own website, pay for the hosting every month. I don't know, like each financial situation is different, but most people don't have that much money. So I looked up different ways to make free websites, and all of them were really junky. I guess they had a lot of ads and stuff on it and everything for the. That's something I can't stress enough, is that if you don't have your traditional art skills down, like even better than your digital art skills, when you enter the field, it's going to be really hard to find a job. You want to focus a lot on your traditional, your like foundation stuff, all your drawing 1, drawing 2, all that stuff is extremely important, because studios like Valve, I actually discussed. One of the clients that I work for knows a lot of the sound guys, the senior sound guys for Valve, and he said that Valve actually pays more attention to your traditional portfolio than your digital. So you can bring in this amazing digital gallery, but they're going to ask you to see line drawings and pencil and paper, like oil paintings if you have them, that type of stuff. And the people that get hired in there are very strong with traditional, and I guess they don't really pay attention to the digital that much. But another thing you want is a profile. So just like a quick blurb about yourself, your interests or whatever, just to let the potential employers get a feel for who you are. And then your resume, which lists all your, I guess, more recent stuff and whatever notoriety that you want. So yeah, it's really basic. I mean, it's all stuff that you learn here. It's just actually getting out there and doing it is another thing, because it actually took me like a year and a half to get a website up, because I was relying on my DeviantArt so much.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of addicting when you get on DeviantArt and start getting a lot of page views and hits. You feel like you're progressing, but that's not really the case. Many of the hits that you get on that website on DeviantArt are from other DeviantArt users. and the majority of them aren't potential employers, and most of them are your competition, to be honest. Coming out of Kendall, you're going to be focusing mostly on freelance stuff, unless you're one of the lucky few that gets into a studio as an entry-level position and start making money right away. But then you're going to be learning pretty much everything over again. Like as far as how the studio likes to do all their work, how they like to streamline all their employees. They're going to want you to work a certain way. You're going to have to work with people, which is something completely different. And so even if you do get into a studio, you're going to be having to start over from scratch, basically. So the pros for the indie scene is that you're your own boss. You can set your own hours, which are going to be long, regardless. You have full creative control with the project, so you have an intellectual property, you want to develop it. You don't have some old guy in a suit telling you what direction to go, like you have to market it, you have to add this, you have to add that. You get to develop it yourself, you have full creative control, which is huge. And you get to decide when the game is finished. That's important because if you want to release a game to the public and you get all this hype built up around it, but then you don't release it, you're gonna find out in the movie. I don't know if you remember the Fez video game, when you watched that. This guy kept pushing back the release date of this game, which everyone wanted at the time, and he kept pushing it back because, one, he broke up with his partner who was working on the game with him, so there's legal problems. And two, he was never happy. He was like a kind of OCD, so he was never happy with the art direction or artwork. So he kept redoing the game basically, and it took like over 4 or 5 years when the game was supposed to be out within 1 year. There's a lot of cons. The first one and the biggest one is no money. Like unless you are like independently wealthy through some inheritance or something, there's no one funding you. You either have to work a side job or do enough private commissions, which eat up all your time, so you never have time to work on the game itself. So that's the biggest thing, is it's very high risk, but it's also, if the game is worth it, like if it's got the potential, it's a very high reward as well. So you're in this situation where you have the potential to sell millions of copies of a game, even if it's for like $5, but all the profits of that game are going to you. You don't have to distribute it to any of the other teams or I guess parties involved in making it if you were to do like a AAA. Because if you're going through a publisher, then they would get a percentage of the cuts, then you'd have to give it to the art team and programming team. But if it's just 1 or 2 people doing this, all the profits go directly to them. So that's why, like Notch, the creator of Minecraft, set up Mojang, which I think is in Sweden or Norway, I can't remember. But yeah, they basically built a studio off of one game, and they've been doing it ever since. It's very stressful working independently. Obviously there's the monetary reason. If you have any like personal issues, like in that movie they discover that a lot of people with psychological issues end up getting into independent gaming because of the appeal to be by yourself and working by yourself and everything. But it also leads to complete collapse because they don't know how to, like, I don't know, take care of themselves, let alone try to micromanage this huge thing. It requires a ton of self-discipline. Like, I'm a pretty bad procrastinator. I'm sure Susan remembers I used to procrastinate quite a bit. But if you have like any of that going on when you're sitting, like if you sit down and work and like every 10 minutes you're like, oh, let me check Facebook or let me check Reddit or whatever, that's something you can't do if you're serious about creating a game by yourself. Like the self-discipline that's required to actually create this game or the game that you're working on is insane. Like there's no real way to describe that until you actually experience it. It's like you sit down to work and you know you have to get a certain amount done, but you keep procrastinating, and it's not like something that is funny or like you have to blow off. It's like a very serious problem. If you're going to be working by yourself with no one kind of looking over your shoulder and telling you what to do, because you're going to run out of money eventually. The indie scene itself, There's always going to be customers, but you're going to be competing against thousands of people at the same time, so it's extremely competitive. I would say it's even more competitive now in the indie field than it is in the actual getting into a studio, 9-to-5 type job. It's partially because of like games like Braid and Minecraft. It's just like students see that and be like, oh well, if I make a game by myself, I'll be a millionaire. So they, kind of go out there and do that. But the good news is most of them fail, which I guess isn't really good news, but it's good news for if you do succeed. That just kind of thins out the competition a little bit. Everyone in the indie game industry is extremely critical. That's something you're going to notice. If you ever go to conventions, promote your work or anything like that, if anyone's honest or they're competitive, if they're your peers, they're going to be kind of bashing you the entire time because they want to get a leg up. They don't want to have to deal with, like, if you have a quality game, they don't want to have to deal with competing with you. As far as working at larger game studios like your Zynga, EA, Ubisoft, Valve, Blizzard, Bethesda, etc., there's a lot of pros, not quite as many cons if you can get into a quality studio. For the pros, there's the money and the stability. A lot of people would consider this a con, but I consider it a pro. Working with large creative teams with similar goals and interests. I find that working by myself, it's very hard to stay motivated. But when you get into an environment where a lot of people have the same mindset as you and are trying to make a similar product, it kind of gets the creative juices flowing and you get to think tank, and it's a completely different experience working with other people, and I haven't had it since I graduated from Kendall, to be honest. It's always been like me, maybe one other person, and a boss. But when you're working at Kendall, like when you're working with other students at Kendall and being able to discuss things and kind of just share your own ideas and whatever, that does so much more for their creative process than what I ever realized. The actual market is what's making all the money right now, to be honest. Like even the AAA games that are considered casual, like in competitive terms, I don't know if anyone plays League of Legends. In competitive terms, that would be a casual game because anyone can hop on and play it and grasp the concept right away. Where other competitive games like StarCraft 2, there's this huge spectrum of things that you have to learn, hotkeys, micromanaging, micro, macro, all this other stuff. And it's a huge learning curve, and it's kind of overwhelming for the casual player, but if you can get someone hooked onto a game that takes very little effort to master, or very little effort to play, but a lot of effort to master, that's where all the money is going to be, because you're going to attract both the casual and the hardcore gamers. I guess you have to figure out what job you want, and then specialize your portfolio towards that job. So if you want to be a character artist, you're going to need to learn how to 3D model really well. You're going to have to learn how to be a 2D artist extremely well, and you're going to have to learn how to basically concept everything from start to finish. Character artists, I'd love to be a character artist. My 3D's not there yet. But what a lot of studios have been doing is, in the past, they would hire a 2D artist to come up with a concept of the character, and then they would have a 3D team which would model the 2D artist's work into 3D. But then a lot of times the 2D art wouldn't be compatible with the 3D technology that they had, so they'd have to send that back to make revisions, and then they'd have to send it back. So it was a huge process. Location, that's another pro and a con. Depends on where you want to move. I think first of the year I'll be heading out to LA, which, I'm deathly scared of LA. I don't know why, it's just in this mind I have guns and all this other thing. And working as a satellite person, you have meetings via Skype. That's as personal as it gets. So maybe you're talking to 2 or 3 other people on Skype at the same time. Yeah, the whole, I guess the freelance thing is it's not for everybody. If you like working directly with people, it's not going to be very fun for you for freelance. But if you like working by yourself, kind of setting your own rules or whatever, it's a good time. I've traveled a lot. I've been to Seattle, I've been to Taiwan and Korea, but moving somewhere permanently for a job is a completely different concept than actually visiting someplace, for a couple of weeks or whatever. Like I stayed in Taiwan for a year, but that was still like actually settling down in a place that you have this kind of perception of is a completely different experience too. So I ultimately want to end up in Seattle, and like I guess I'm kind of working to get there, and I don't see it happening within the next couple of years, but eventually. That's my plan anyway. You get to work on AAA titles, which is a huge, but that's only if you're interested in working for a large studio for the rest of your life. Like if you ever want to, like if you plan on working for a studio for a couple of years and then making your own thing and kind of moving on from there, it's not a huge deal that you've published AAA titles, except for the notoriety. But if you plan on working for other studios, you want a AAA title under your belt. That's like the biggest thing that studios like. Every single job application bonus must have, shipped a AAA title, and worked on. It's just I don't know why studios emphasize that aside from they want people that are at a certain skill level, I guess.
Sure.
But if you get into a studio and they lay you off for whatever reason, a lot of game studios fail, which is a sad fact. But if you get into a studio and it fails and you get laid off, you want the highest quality games that you've worked on to be the centerpiece for your resume, because when you send that in, they're going to be like, oh, you worked on this game, well, it must be good. It's a very big con to a lot of people is having to answer to ultimately some old guy in a suit that has no idea what's going on in the gaming industry, that has no passion for it whatsoever. But I guess a lot of the times the studio itself is kind of a separate entity, so you have the people that work in the studio that you're having to talk to every day, and not so much the other. It's only when the studio's threatened to be closed down or something is when you get to interact with the other people. You have very little creative control over the game itself. You're sectioned off into teams which are responsible for different things. So like say you get to work on a game and you're responsible for the background art. Well, you're working with 2 or 3 other people most likely that are also responsible for the background art. So if you have a cool idea and the rest of the team doesn't share that cool idea, you don't get to express that into the game itself because, majority rules. And ultimately it's up to the art director, the lead artist, to say what can and cannot be in the game. So as far as creative control, you have very little of it. You get to express yourself in the concept work and everything, but when it comes to what actually makes it into the game, it's very up in the air. Like any other job, you have to deal with annoying co-workers. Deadlines is another huge thing. Even though you have deadlines as a freelancer, you make the deadlines basically, and if you don't meet the deadline, you're only hurting yourself. But if you have a deadline in a studio and you're working with other people, you're not just hurting yourself anymore, you're affecting a huge... Freelancer is a really good place to start. The DeviantArt job forums, I can give you a link to those later. They're really easy to find, but those are hit and miss, but a lot of good jobs come from that too. You just kind of have to weed through them, and there's a ton of competition for each one. And most of them, if you can get 5 or 6 repeat clients where they have projects that are ongoing and they send you work like every couple weeks, that's like the ideal situation as a freelancer, because you don't have to go out there and keep looking for work. If you post and you pick it up, more power to you. It's kind of risky because you're not sure who you're working with yet until you get to know them. That's why having a basic contract set up is a really good idea. And then you get job offers like this: draw my bad girl wife, realistic artist wanted. Item artists for a virtual pet site, commissions for anime, manga, digital painting. So it varies. Tattoo designs, whatever you're into. It's just gotta sit there and take a couple hours. You have a preliminary set of rules, and you say, $20 an hour. This and this and this will cost you $300 regardless. This is the contract I use. You can sign through. It's called echosign.com. You just send over the document you have prepared. They just type in their name, send it back, and that counts as a signed contract. But after you get those set of rules kind of down and figure out what your price range is, how fast you work, etc., then maybe 1 out of 10 people that you send that to is going to be like, okay, well, let's do this. So you're not going to get every single job, because there's people out there that are going to be like, well, I don't want to sign any contracts, or I'm too nervous, or whatever. But the people that know what they're doing, and those are the type of people you want to work with regardless, are going to be fine with signing contracts. They understand how things work. Yeah, it's a lot different than doing commissions for friends, or people that message you looking for artwork.
Sounds like
There's a lot of different ways that you can go around paying. There's different sites that function the same as PayPal, but I've just never experimented with them, so I don't trust them at all. It's just like I have to have done something before I'm comfortable with using it. And direct bank transfers is kind of cumbersome for a lot of people. They don't feel comfortable doing that either. So freelancer.com is a really good site to find, I guess, more professional jobs, professional contract jobs. It's really easy to search for. Say if you want to search a project for illustration, just type that in. And all these things come up: illustration designed for mobile apps, illustration flyer thing. And it has the prices, and then you can bid on the job. So whoever usually has the lowest bid wins, but if your quality is high enough that they want to pay a little extra for you, that works too. I think Freelancer takes, it's either 6% up to a point, and then it's like 2% after that.
okay.
For jobs, I think for over like $10,000 jobs, they take 2%, but everything else they take 6%. But yeah, that's a really good sign, or good site. If you don't have an account here, I'd suggest making one. Yeah, being able to draw really fast and produce a basic sketch really fast is pretty important, because the people that you're working with don't really have a solid grasp. I shouldn't say don't have a solid grasp. They don't have the same image of the character in their heads as you do. So to give them a really quick example that's closer to what you had in mind will get them to kind of think in the same terms.
It's a communication tool.
Right. If you're gonna try to describe something to them without showing them anything visual, it's extremely difficult for someone to imagine that without help. So you get the basic shape down. I don't know what you want this character to be doing, but so once you get this down, this is pretty important too, because with Photoshop you tend to do really asymmetrical drawings where you want a little bit of asymmetry, but you want it to look proportionate. And what oftentimes happens is you'll end up with something like this, where you're drawing, and then you're so zoned in that you don't realize it until you look back and be like, oh, well, that looks horrible. And then, so flipping it from, like I have my flip page set to Command F.
Command F is what you're using?
Yeah, so I can just hit Command F, flip the page over, flip the image over to a mirror image, and then make any adjustments, flip it back. So just keep that in mind too, where you don't want to be so zoned in on the image that you end up making it disfigured unless it's supposed to be. So once you get the rough shape down, I don't know how much it is.
Susan's awesome brushes.
You can tell already that his torso is
You
way
want
too
me to
long,
hear
so
something fabulous like
unless
that?
that stylistic choice, you're gonna want to make it a little bit in the results, kind of select and move on. And that's kind of the point of not adding too much detail right away, is when you're making changes like that, when it's changes to the base anatomy, you're making those changes without losing a lot of work. That's what you're trying to do, is save a lot of work. that his leg's too long or is too skinny right there, so just add that. And I work out at, say if I have an 8x10 piece of paper, I work zoomed out at 50% because it gives you a better perspective. It lets you see the entire image the entire time you're going. Whereas if you work at 100%, you're zoomed in. A lot of times it's even bigger than this, so you'll be working on a section like this. And you get done with, say, like this collarbone or something. And then you look out and you zoom out and realize, oh, well, that doesn't look right. This is way too dark. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. So working out zoomed out helps you keep a perspective on the image and keep it balanced, I guess. As far as proportions and everything goes, it's also easier to keep track of.
So you're switching between the eraser and the brush.
Yep.
B and E shortcuts.
Yeah, hotkeys are exact. Like you want to work with hotkeys. You don't want to have to go and change your brush randomly. Like you can change your brush using your. I don't know what it is set on here, but you can set. Oh, here you go. The arrow keys. You can change your brush. Kind of switch through. If you have a small palette of brushes, I can leave this on this computer if people want to take my brush set.
Okay.
I just kind of collected through different brush sets. Like you have skin textures down here, where if you are doing someone's, like a close-up of someone's face or whatever, you can have a skin texture brush that adds imperfections to the skin, and just kind of experiment with that. Makes it look a little more natural. And you have, for speed painting, you have your building brushes up here, where it's
Instant building.
pretty much, yeah. It's
Yeah.
say if you're going to do a scene with him with a building in the background or whatever, you set a gradient. And then you use your building brush. You can set the pressure and everything to be different too, so pressure is not the same. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Thanks, Brad. That's
Thanks.
Brad Morgan right there,
All right,
giving
cool.
you tips.
So yeah, this is, oops. You can set this to make it look more natural as it fades from the atmospheric perspective. And you have multiple brushes and this type of thing, where if you want to set like a foreground image. Want something more sticking out in the foreground, you can use this type of brushes. And, I don't know. You can go through all these brushes and play with them yourself. It's just what I've been collecting for the last year and a half. Okay, anyway, going back to this. Once you get your basic shape down that you want, you can get into some of the details. I still like to stay a little bit zoomed out for this. If you're going to draw, let's say, someone's face, you want it to match. It sounds weird, but you can draw a face and it won't match the body as far as proportion. So you want to be able to draw a face with it matching the body without it looking weird. So you want the body in view while you're doing the rough lay-in, the blocking in. And a lot of this goes back to your drawing from anatomy. It's like if you learn different muscle groups, you don't have to learn the names of the muscle groups specifically, but if you know what they look like, where they connect, what they're supposed to connect to, and that type of thing, it's a lot easier. That way you don't have to keep referring to a reference every 10 minutes or whatever because you're unsure. Just makes the process a lot faster, and that's what a lot of employees look for, is speed. It's time is money, unfortunately.
So many of your characters have mech built onto them.
Yeah.
How do you decide to move from this kind of figure drawing into mech? Is it?
It's, I guess, what your personal experience with mech is. It sounds weird, but if you read a lot of books, watch a lot of science fiction, all of that subconsciously goes into your head, where you kind of pick and choose things that appeal to you, and you store that until it's your turn to draw, and then that starts coming out. With like growing up, I'd read a lot of the Masamune Shirow mangas, which is all cyberpunk, like highly detailed cyberpunk, and like I've noticed in my drawing that get rid of the eyeball, add whatever visual thing you want to include. And then just kind of add details to try to make it not look so generic. Like right now, this reminds me of way too many different things that I've seen in different, sci-fi or comics or the board or whatever. But if you can just tweak it a little bit, say like add a horn here, or add an earpiece that is a weird thing. Like it doesn't really have to have a function, but if it's visual, if it visually matches the rest of it, you can make up a function for it later.
It's a lot about shape dynamics too, the way that you play with big shapes versus little shapes.
Right. Like each component, if you look at, say, like that camera, it has a basic shape, but when you break each component down, there's the different crevices and lines on the lens and the aperture, the inside of it and everything. So the more you can reflect that in your artwork, kind of indirectly make that show. Like if you had a piece on his shoulder that has a circle, has a ridge, has something else in it, and a bunch of this type of thing. The more you elaborate on it, the more sense it makes, I guess. Like, oh yeah, that must do this, or yeah, that must power this or whatever. And the function usually comes after the form, which is weird. Because none of this stuff actually exists in the world. A lot of things, like different mechanical components on cars and stuff, you can directly reference and people know how they work. But with, like, say, cyberpunk or speculative fiction or any of the genres that require sort of an imagination on what technology is going to be like once you get to a certain point, which the technology that everyone in this classroom is going to be working with in the industry is going to look completely different in 10 years than it does now. And like looking at the different advances in the processing power, which was a huge limiting factor in video games. We're not going to have that anymore because they're developing semiconductors based off of graphene, which is carbon molecules. I mean, it's at an atomic level. There's carbon atoms that comprise this like sheet that lets them make semiconductors, and that'll allow them to make processors, that are 7, 8, 9 gigahertz. And right now we're limited to about like 5, I think. Once we break that barrier, it's going to be unlimited processing power, and then you're going to get into quantum computing and all this other crap.
Right.
And you're going to have
very
things.
Small devices.
Right, and say like in 50 years, we could very well have something similar to the holodeck from Star Trek. And it's not, that's not.
I'll meet you on the holodeck.
Yeah. So you're going to be having to adjust yourself with that too. Like as the technology progresses, you're going to have to adapt it. Just going from 3 CS5 or 6 or whatever this is. Now it's taking a learning curve. The pressure sensitivity, the way things work is completely different. I like it. This is a nice feature, this little slidey thingy.
Yeah.
What's your method for digital painting?
Digital painting, I have 2 different ways. Like I'll show you right here.
Like I would give him some skin textures or like
Sure.
metal textures on the some of the mechanics.
Yep. What I like to do is, if I'm going to do a piece where the character is standalone, he has to be just a character with a transparent background. What I like to do is kind of do a crayon type thing where you color in between the lines. You take just a standard brush. You take like I work in grayscale up until the point where I want to color it, and I put a color layer over it. It's just faster. I take a lighter shade of gray or whatever color you want, and just kind of stay within the lines. You can clean up later, but and that way you can separate these 2 layers, like say this one and this one. You can combine, you can merge them, make a transparent background, and it'll just be the character. Otherwise, if I'm doing a illustration, say like a full-page illustration, I don't really care about layers. What I like to do is take a like a pressure-sensitive brush. That's weird. Anyway, take a pressure-sensitive brush, and then I don't really care where I go with it. Get the highlights in. Is import it into Coral Painter. I know Photoshop has a different brush set now than the one I'm using, so you could theoretically do this in Photoshop. When I get to about that point, I'll just cut this down so it's a little bit smaller. And the way I work is I take this out of Photoshop, open it up in Painter. How do you import this?
Import what?
A palette layout. Customize or oh, here we go. Yep. What I like to do is take the Smeary oil brush or the blenders. I'm using Grainy Water 30 right now on Coral Painter, and I. Sorry, this is all the.